Video series, Strange Minds of History, The Ones We Never Understood. Episode 1. Joshua Norton, Emperor of Nowhere, Ruler of Hearts. Part 1. The Madman Who Wore a Crown No One Gave Him. He once said he had lived more than 2 lives, one on earth, one in heaven. Was he crazy? Or was he just so wise that no one could understand him? You're listening. The streets of San Francisco breathe beneath your feet. Cobblestones click under polished boots. Horses huff in the fog, and somewhere in the salty air, amid the clang of bells and the smell of ocean and coal fire, a man walks alone. His name is Joshua Abraham Norton, but he prefers to be called His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Norton I, Protector of Mexico. He wears a beaver hat with a peacock feather tucked inside. His coat is blue with gold epaulets. Rusty medals dangle from his chest, some real, some invented. He carries a cane like a scepter and nods to the fishmongers, the bankers, the newspaper boys, as if blessing his loyal subjects. And strangest of all, they nod back. The year is 1860. San Francisco is still drunk from the gold rush. You can almost hear the pickaxes buried in memory. Some men struck at port, most just struck rock. The city is young, reckless, swollen with ambition and desperation. It's a place where men arrive with nothing and leave with stories no one believes. That's where you meet him. The relogement
For dance, the Ryaskas. Does don't make mattering. No, green. Like I need point to the six. One in here. Move on. Like pay the limit. Third, form. West for some ceiling like archives. And even she loves see things. Like you made pump. Happy things. I mean, I really couldn't exactly. It's the best pack. She love it. I know where man did. I know. You see, the prayer and no finish. Or Cabela. Simple. There's kittens. Now the we're out with I or given to think ways out. But Monday I'll be around. Oh, if the things actually are there, that new way under. Yes, time for no, I can't for make me on that hand or something. And we're saying, just kind of typing and my music. There's something over there is issue. I'm not sure a beer clear out. Jude, drink Lee like for this. Yeah, well, look, shoot. They like the God is now the close connect on Wolfing Drew and unscurrying. Is scary. Like, subjectly fellow, but heck, correct. I think I'm coughing straight. The bucks are yours. A feeling around and or this fit can't encourage you. Should the same but when I am at Timmons train to work to the island citizens for I spist up your own killing when the replace you am name one of the still there look as and your mandel have fixed up and instant and for him kill the race but isn't like my we're frozen but the vocal you that's for when it to see the real he's that suggested Josh when what to run net nature message and I have it as the hater McQuarrie well I spelling hey and still rare I no you're called it matches at work now trees Richard because one big you know works dead man I low and I'm dollar even is also hey I'm turned to give much and need have a bullet girl we have sold them every evening left and aren't doing and then just tell you shimless American clothes big until I didn't simple have no yes wait before you call sure right don't know it right but everybody likes little tidbits be bad for you and then it's fine dream comes in the just what you get and also murderless as a doesn't remember past for the very another didn't taste her I'm not some big sheep thing and sounds you guy it was and dessert not there and that is else and all right that I'm get resolved that hello we are and of Vizian.
China placed a ban on rice exports. Panic gripped San Francisco. Prices soared. Joshua Norton saw opportunity. He bought up an entire Peruvian rice shipment at 12 cents per pound, planning to control the market. Days later, more ships arrived from Peru. The price collapsed to 3 cents. Joshua Norton lost everything. Pause. Feel that? That silent collapse? The one no one hears but you? There's something fragile in that moment. Not just money, not just reputation. It's the disintegration of an identity. A man who bet it all on foresight, and lost to fate. He disappeared for a while after that. Some say he left the city. Others say he wandered its back alleys, invisible. But when he returned, it wasn't as a man anymore. It was as an emperor. On September 17, 1859, a short notice appeared in the San Francisco Bulletin. At the peremptory request of a large majority of the citizens of these United States, I, Joshua Norton, declare and proclaim myself Emperor of these United States. He signed it Norton I. Most people expected a laugh, a prank, a drunken jest by a broken man. But the next day, he walked the streets, wearing a regal uniform, straight back, eyes alight with a calm no sane man should possess. He handed out proclamations, he wrote edicts, he issued royal currency bearing his face, and merchants accepted it. And somehow, you still don't know what his decrees said. You haven't heard about his wars, or how he tried to abolish Congress, or the time he demanded a bridge be built and the world ignored him, until one day they didn't. But that's in the next chapter. To be continued in Part 2. The Day the Emperor Declared War on Congress. Part 2. The Day the Emperor Declared War on Congress. You can almost hear the rustle of parchment, ink still wet, a hand trembling, not from fear, but from fury, wrapped in formality. It's early morning, cold fog licking the windows of the San Francisco Bulletin. The editor yawns, sips bitter coffee, then notices something slid under the door. An envelope, handwritten, signed, Emperor Norton I. You lean in closer. This is the day the Emperor declares war. The year is 1860. Abraham Lincoln hasn't yet been elected. The country simmers like a kettle. North and South, slave and free, state and federal. But for one man, the fire has already boiled over. Inside the Emperor's latest proclamation, written with theatrical calm, is a command. The dissolution of the United States Congress is hereby decreed for the reasons of corruption, inefficiency, and the failure to serve the people. Joshua Norton, once a bankrupt merchant, now self-appointed Emperor of the United States, declares that the entire legislative branch is to be disbanded. Yes, disbanded. He adds, quite seriously, that military forces should escort all members of Congress out of the Capitol building. And in that moment, the impossible becomes not plausible, but strangely dignified. You feel a twinge of something: pride, disbelief, envy. Let's pause again. What does it mean to declare war alone? In 2025, you might call this delusion, a man shouting into the wind, cosplaying authority. But let me ask you, when every man in a suit lies for profit, and every promise from power is just another smoke ring, isn't a lone, honest madman more sane than the crowd? Because here's the difference. Joshua Norton didn't lie for gain. He didn't swindle. He didn't even ask for taxes. He gave people something they were starving for, a symbol of justice that wasn't for sale. He issued decrees like thunderclaps, not for comedy, but for correction. When he dissolved Congress, it wasn't random madness. It was protest in royal costume. Congress had become a theater of paralysis, filibusters, and fraud. The common people were squeezed. The rich drank champagne. And so, Norton, with no army and no title anyone recognized, did the only thing a powerless man could do. He declared truth as if it were law. In the streets, people chuckled, but the papers printed it. And the thing is, people read it. It wasn't satire. It was something stranger, sadder, more poetic. Imagine a world so broken that the only person who speaks plainly is a self-made emperor. Now imagine this. You're walking past a courthouse. The emperor stands outside in full uniform, cane in hand. A young couple is arguing on the steps, tears in their eyes. He walks over, listens, then pronounces a royal mediation. They laugh, awkwardly, but They stop fighting. They thank him. It happens more than once. His decrees range from the ridiculous to the prophetic. There shall be a suspension bridge between Oakland and San Francisco. A League of Nations shall be formed to maintain world peace. Paper money must be backed by coin, else the people will suffer. He's laughed at, until years later, some of these things happen. So what was this really? Performance art? Mental illness? A protest disguised as a pageant? The answer lives in the quiet spaces between applause and pity. Even police officers began to treat him with deference. A young patrolman once arrested him, charged with vagrancy. San Francisco rose in outrage. Letters flooded the station. Editors fumed. Prominent businessmen posted bail. The police chief personally apologized. The charges were dropped, and Norton was released with a formal bow. From that day forward, officers were ordered to salute him when they saw him. Now tell me, how many madmen get saluted by the law? The more you study him, the more contradictions you find. He was homeless, but lived like a king. He had no legal authority, but issued decrees followed by the public. He had no riches, but his royal bonds, signed Emperor Norton I, were accepted by merchants. He lived in a boarding house. A single room, modest, clean. His royal uniform always pressed. He often walked the city for hours, quietly, alone, just observing, watching, and somehow, in that watching, he saw deeper than others. He once said, "I am but a servant to my people," and people believed him. Let's drift backward for a moment. Before the proclamations, before the uniforms, before the parades and attention, was a man who lost everything. And instead of falling apart in bitterness, he reinvented himself as something impossible. It's hard not to wonder, if you were broken tomorrow, could you rebuild yourself with such elegant madness? You stand there now, imagining the fog curling around a newspaper stand in 1860. You hear laughter as a boy reads out loud the latest imperial decree. Whereas the United States Congress has failed its sacred duties, let it be known that the Emperor commands its dismissal. People laugh, but their laughter has warmth, not cruelty, because somehow this man, this Emperor, has become. And yet, this is only the beginning of his rule. There are still the imperial notes to foreign kings, the scandal with his currency, the truth behind his protectorship of Mexico, and the mysterious reasons why no one ever mocked him to his face. But more than that, there's the matter of that bridge, the one he dreamed before anyone else dared. To be continued in Part 3, The Emperor Who Saw the Bridge Before It Was Built. Part 3, The Emperor Who Saw the Bridge Before It Was Built. Sometimes the future whispers through the mouths no one listens to. That whisper? It came from a man in a faded blue coat, walking across the bay mist, pointing toward a place where nothing yet stood. He said, "There shall be a bridge. It shall connect San Francisco and Oakland, and it shall serve as a monument to unity." Everyone laughed. Then they forgot. And then, decades later, they built it. The year is 1872. You're walking along the muddy shoreline at the edge of the city, where salty winds mix with coal smoke. The bay stretches wide and impassable. Ferries chug across like tired turtles. The thought of a bridge, spanning this vast distance, feels like madness. And then you see him. Joshua Norton, the Emperor, cloak flapping in the wind, cane raised like Moses at the Red Sea, staring into fog and future. You watch as he points across the bay and proclaims, aloud and alone, "We order that a suspension bridge be constructed from Oakland Point to Goat Island, and thence to San Francisco. No one asked, no one believed. But still, he declared, "Let's be clear, this was not a time of bridge dreams. It was the era of railroads, robber barons, and brutal economics. Steel was precious. Labor was cheap. The city was young, unruly. There was no political appetite for bridges, just ferries and profit." But the emperor, he didn't calculate feasibility. He calculated necessity. Because what he saw wasn't engineering, it was connection. You pause. Ask yourself, how many things in your life were once impossible until someone insisted they weren't? And more dangerously, what if the only difference between genius and delusion is time? Because Joshua Norton had no money, no vote, no seat at the table. And yet, he spoke of the Bay Bridge half a century before the first rivet was driven. Today, you drive across that bridge in a matter of minutes. Back then, it would have sounded like magic. He didn't stop there. Norton sent letters to the city councils of San Francisco and Oakland demanding action on the bridge. He included sketches. He explained its importance, not in terms of commerce, but of national unity. He believed cities had to be bound, not just by laws or currency, but by vision. To him, the bridge wasn't metal. It was metaphor. Of course, no one built it. Not in his lifetime. They shelved the idea, scoffed at it, dismissed it as the ramblings of a man too fond of proclamations and not fond enough of practicality. But the whisper never fully died. And when in 1936 the Bay Bridge was completed, when the towers rose like twin exclamation marks in steel, San Francisco suddenly remembered the man who had called it first. Today, if you walk the bridge and squint into the fog, you might imagine Norton's ghost nodding quietly in approval. And here's the part that hurts just a little. They never gave him credit, not officially. He died before the foundation was ever laid, before any real architect dared speak his vision aloud. And yet, wasn't the idea his? Isn't it strange how often the world only embraces the dreams it once mocked after the dreamer is no longer around to witness it? You keep thinking about that lonely figure on the waterfront, his uniform threadbare, his boots worn, but his eyes, clear, unwavering, like a man seeing a map the rest of the world hadn't been handed yet. He once said, "The real emperor is he who serves his people not with gold, but with imagination." Perhaps it was always less about the bridge and more about the belief that such things should exist. Let's return to the city. The emperor walks past butcher shops and bookstores, nodding at strangers, occasionally shouting small decrees. He reminds the police to keep order. He offers his opinion on sewer lines, schoolhouses, and proper etiquette for railway conductors. But every so often, he stops at the bay, staring into that gray distance, as if waiting. And yet, not everyone laughed. A few engineers, young, idealistic, took note of the idea. Years later, when political momentum finally turned, when steel became cheaper, and when the city swelled past what ferries could handle, those whispers returned. They found old newspaper clippings, old letters, and somewhere in the dusty archives lay the emperor's vision, word for word. Maybe that's what makes Joshua Norton unforgettable. He didn't build the bridge. He didn't fund it. He didn't even live to see it. But he believed in it. And belief, when shouted loudly enough, tends to linger, long after the voice goes silent. Let's step out of time for a moment. Zoom out. Picture a man, mocked, homeless, dressed like Napoleon, standing on a muddy bank, daring to declare that people would one day float across the air in steel. Now picture every doubter, every smirk, every editor who printed his decree next to jokes and dog ads. Now picture the bridge today, standing, functional, real. Who won? That's the strange thing about history. Sometimes the madmen are only mad because they're too early. Joshua Norton may not have ruled an empire, but he ruled something harder. He ruled imagination. There are more whispers waiting. Next time, you'll hear how he became Protector of Mexico and what that strange title really meant. Was it a joke? A fantasy? Or was it, again, a mirror held up to a broken world? Part 4. Protector of Mexico. The title no one understood. There's something strange about giving yourself a crown, but stranger still is claiming to protect a kingdom you've never stepped foot in. One morning, tucked inside a crumpled envelope slid under the door of the Daily Alta California, was a new imperial decree. Same elegant signature, same heavy strokes of ink that smelled of pipe smoke and determination. It read, "Let it be known henceforth that I, Norton I, Emperor of the United States, do also assume the title of Protector of Mexico." You pause, blink, and ask yourself, Mexico? Why would a man who lives in a boarding house in San Francisco declare himself the guardian of an entire nation? Let's find out. The year is 1864, and if you think America's fractured, look a little further south. Mexico is burning. French troops have invaded. Napoleon III, cousin of the Napoleon, sends soldiers to prop up a puppet emperor named Maximilian. He's an Austrian noble who barely speaks Spanish, yet sits on a Mexican throne claiming divine right under foreign guns. The people of Mexico? They're starving, fighting, fleeing. There is no real stability, no leadership free from blood or bribes. And all the while, from the upper window of a crumbling building in San Francisco, Joshua Norton watches, reads the news, feels something stir. Then he writes it. With a cracked pen and shaking hand, he issues a decree. To prevent further injury to our southern neighbors and to resist European tyranny, we assume the duty of Protector of Mexico until such time that peace and proper sovereignty are restored. Now, pause again. Because it's tempting to laugh. A man who owns no land, no sword, no passport, claiming to shield a foreign country from war and empire? But look closer, because behind the costume lies a kind of courage. What is a protector? Is it someone with armies, or someone who simply refuses to look away? Joshua Norton had no legions, but he had intention, and in that intention, mad or noble, you decide, he declared that injustice anywhere was not someone else's problem. That was his genius, wasn't it? The ability to stand in the middle of a broken world and say, with complete sincerity, I may not be king, but I will act like one. You see, the emperor didn't care about borders. His empire was philosophical. In his mind, Mexico was not foreign. It was simply a neighbor who needed a shield. And if the real emperors of Europe had forgotten their duty to the people, they no longer deserved the title. So Norton took it. And the city? The city let him. They published the title. People began greeting him not just as Your Majesty, but with the extra flourish, Protector of Mexico. It was absurd. It was beautiful. It was Norton. Historians have long tried to interpret this moment. Some say it was parody, a joke aimed at the absurdity of European colonialism. Others say it was a gesture of solidarity with Mexico's suffering, a rare moment where a broken man in the north extended imaginary arms toward the oppressed in the south. But there's a third possibility, and it's the most haunting. What if Norton didn't believe it was a joke? What if he truly believed, deep in his soul, that titles meant nothing, unless backed by moral force? In his writings, you find glimpses of something fierce. He criticized the U.S. government not just for inefficiency, but for cowardice, for watching tyranny spread while doing nothing, for failing to act not because it couldn't, but because it wouldn't. So he acted, with ink, with paper, with a crown made of defiance. You're probably wondering, did Mexico ever hear about him? There's no record of an official response, but strange stories trickle through the cracks. A Mexican merchant once claimed to carry a copy of Norton's proclamation to Veracruz. A newspaper in Mazatlan supposedly ran a small item about El Protector Loco del Norte, the mad protector of the North. No confirmations, no refutations, just echoes. And echoes matter. Because here's a thought you can't shake. What if every great revolution begins, not with armies, but with ideas so absurd they feel like fiction? Wasn't abolition once called lunacy? Women voting? Insanity. Bridges across bays? Science fiction. So what if Norton's declaration wasn't ridiculous? What if it was simply premature? You sit there now, feeling torn. A man with no army, no legitimacy, and no mandate declares himself guardian of another nation, and yet he never profited, never exploited, never oppressed. He simply claimed the moral responsibility others had abandoned. And that, whether you call it madness or miracle, is rare. You begin to understand Norton in a different light. He didn't declare war on France. He didn't march with weapons. But he used the only tools he had: visibility, absurdity, and belief. The world was addicted to power. He was addicted to purpose. He walked the streets of San Francisco, not like a beggar, but like a sentinel. People scoffed. Then they listened. Then, quietly, they respected. And when someone whispered, "Why Mexico?" he would reply, "Because no man is foreign if his heart is just." There are still more strange proclamations to come. A ban on political parties, a declaration to abolish the word Frisco, and his vision for a new world currency. But none cut so close to the soul as this: a broken man with no power, choosing to defend strangers. To be continued in Part 5, The Emperor Who Outlawed Politics to Save the People. Part 5. The Emperor Who Outlawed Politics to Save the People. He believed politicians were the problem, so he banned them. Not metaphorically, not as satire. He wrote a decree, signed, sealed, and sent it off like thunder in the middle of a quiet room. You are there when it happens. The sky is heavy, the streetcars clatter like distant musket fire, and the city breathes that slow, aching breath of disillusionment. People are tired. They don't say it, but you see it. In the way newsboys mumble headlines they don't believe. In the way workers stare through newspapers instead of reading them. Then he appears. Joshua Norton, Emperor, Protector, Paradox in boots. He walks past City Hall, unfurls a sheet of paper, and declares, "Political parties are hereby abolished. They have failed the people, and their selfish quarrels are the root of national disorder." And you don't laugh, because somehow it doesn't feel like a joke anymore. It's 1870. The United States is limping after Civil War. Reconstruction is a battlefield. The country is technically whole, but psychologically shattered. In the newspapers, political bickering devours the headlines. The Republicans and Democrats accuse each other of everything: treason, fraud, tyranny. Real people, everyday people, get nothing but inflation and ash. And in this storm of cynicism, one man with no money, no title, and no followers writes with absolute authority, "Let all members of political factions disband and serve the nation as citizens, not as combatants." Think about that. He wasn't anti-government. He was anti-ego. To him, political parties weren't instruments of progress. They were tribes, rival camps drunk on ideology, addicted to power, forgetting the people they claimed to represent. He once wrote in a letter, published of course, "The empire cannot afford such childish rivalries. Loyalty must belong to truth, not to banners." Tell me, does that sound like insanity to you? Or does it sound like a mirror? You walk beside him now. The crowd is listening, uneasy. A few snicker, some nod. A cobbler mutters, "He ain't wrong." A lawyer shakes his head but doesn't argue. And that's the magic of Norton, isn't it? He says things you want to dismiss until you can't, until the words hang in your mind like smoke you can't wave away. He didn't just ban political parties, he offered an alternative. In his imperial decree on national unity, Norton proposed a council of wise men and women, nonpartisan, unpaid, rotating by merit and public vote. Not to replace all government, but to steer it. They would be selected for clear thought, clean hands, and quiet hearts. Some said Norton was mocking the system, but mockery needs bitterness. He had none. He wasn't sarcastic. He was sincere to the point of discomfort. He walked the line between utopia and absurdity so well that people couldn't tell which side he meant to be on. Maybe that was the point. Let's be honest. If you met someone today who said, "Let's abolish political parties," you'd probably raise an eyebrow. But then you remember, Congress's approval rating in 2025 hovers in the teens. People are exhausted. Campaigns are blood sport. Trust is a sinking ship. And suddenly, Norton's old decree doesn't seem so foolish. It seems like a question we should have taken seriously a long time ago. Here's the truth Norton understood. Truth wrapped in brass buttons and ridiculous medals. Politics isn't about power. It's about people. And when systems forget that, even the craziest man in town might be the only sane one left. You remember now a scene from that year. He's standing outside a voting hall. Not voting, he can't, technically, but watching. He hands out slips of paper, not telling people who to vote for, but how to think about voting. One reads, "A wise vote serves the nation. A blind vote serves the machine." Another, "Choose the voice that speaks least of enemies and most of solutions." He hands one to a young man, who squints at it and says, "You should run for office." Norton replies gently, "Why would I run when I already rule?" Did people follow his decree? Did political parties crumble? Of course not. But the newspapers printed it. People talked. A few wrote letters agreeing with him. One shopkeeper even posted, "No party politics spoken here. Imperial edict enforced," on his window. It was small, fleeting. But then again, so is the first spark in a forest. Historians have struggled to pin Norton down. Was he crazy? Possibly. But crazy people don't usually write detailed political reform proposals. Crazy people don't stop riots. Crazy people don't get honored with police salutes. Maybe the question isn't, was he crazy, but what does sanity look like when the whole world is pretending? You're beginning to see the shape of something. A man who wore a costume, not to deceive, but to reveal. A man who walked the city, not for spectacle, but for service. A man who declared war on lies, not with swords, but with sincerity. And now, the people begin to wonder, if Emperor Norton can abolish Congress, and protect Mexico, and ban political parties, what else might he do? You'll soon learn about the night he tried to fix money itself. Not by counterfeiting, not by theft, but by declaring a new kind of currency, backed not by gold, but by trust. To be continued in Part 6, The Night the Emperor Printed His Own Money. Part 6. The Night the Emperor Printed His Own Money. The strangest thing about the Emperor's money wasn't that he printed it. It was that people used it. No, really, walk into a saloon, order a meal, and slide across a hand-cut note that read, "Payable on demand, $10, Empire of Norton 1. And the barkeep? He doesn't blink. He tucks the bill into the drawer, pours you a drink, and says, "Tell His Majesty I send my regards." You sit there now, stunned, because once again, Joshua Norton, Emperor of Nothing, has broken the rules of reality by believing in something harder than anyone else dares. It's 1871. San Francisco is roaring. Immigrants flood the docks, fires rage in the alleyways, and gold still whispers from the hills beyond. The city runs on commerce, coins, and cutthroat deals. And yet, inside this chaos, one man calmly declares, "Gold has weight, but trust has value." And with that, he creates imperial bonds, a currency that has no legal backing, no precious metal, and no national approval. Only a promise. Only Norton. You follow him now, on a foggy evening. The air is thick with salt and candle wax. In his rented room, small, tidy, lit by one flickering lamp, he carefully slices paper rectangles. Each one bears a seal, an ornate signature, a face, his own, bearded and royal. They read, Norton I, Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico, promises to pay the bearer. And below that, 10, 20, even $50. Was it counterfeit? Yes and no. It broke no laws because no such currency existed. It was monopoly money, but printed without irony. It was symbolic credit in the empire of trust. The first merchant to accept it was a Chinese grocer named Mr. Hua. Norton walked in, selected dried fish and rice, and offered a $10 imperial note. Mr. Hua studied the bill, looked at the emperor, and said, "Your word is good." From that moment, a small circle of businesses began quietly accepting Norton's money, not because they expected payment, but because they believed in something else. The performance was real enough to honor. This is where you stop and breathe. Because this isn't about economics. It's about faith. Faith in character. Faith in imagination. Faith that there's still a place in the world for noble fraud, the kind that builds, not breaks. Ask yourself, what gives money value anyway? It's not metal, not ink. It's consent, agreement, a story we all agree to believe. Norton understood that, and in his strange way, he told a better story than the banks ever did. His notes became collector's items. Travelers bought them to take back east. Artists framed them. Some restaurants hung them on walls like royal decrees. They were worth nothing, and yet became precious. And you begin to realize that Norton's greatest invention wasn't his title. It was the illusion, so powerful it became truth. But he didn't stop at currency. In one proclamation, he proposed a national system of trust-backed bonds, a financial model where citizens could issue microcredit to one another based on community reputation, not collateral. He argued, wealth hoarded by the few is the ruin of the many. Let credit flow as freely as respect. Sound crazy? Sure. Until 2025, when microloans, peer-to-peer lending, and trust-based crypto platforms explode across the globe. Norton just happened to imagine it, 150 years too early. He even offered to print imperial credit passes for those unemployed or destitute, saying, "This paper proves the bearer is worthy of dignity and assistance. Let it be honored as we honor the soul." Some accepted them, not because they were valid, because they were kind. Now imagine this. You walk into a bakery in 1872. The owner pins a Norton $20 bill to the wall behind the register. You ask, "Why do you keep that?" He says, "Because he may be mad, but that paper's worth more to me than the real stuff." And then he adds, more quietly, "It reminds me that money should mean something." There are whispers that the emperor never cashed a single real check in his life. When given gold coins by tourists, he often re-gifted them to beggars. He refused land, refused wealth, lived in a small boarding house his entire life. Why? Maybe because Norton understood the most dangerous truth of all. When you start to believe your own power, you forget the people who gave it to you. So instead, he stayed poor, but rich in reverence. And yet, not everyone respected it. One bank manager mocked the notes, calling them lunatic parchment. A week later, that manager was robbed. Norton posted a notice in the Alta California, "Let it be known, Thieves who rob the unkind only spread justice in disguise. The people roared with laughter, but deep down, they knew he wasn't really joking. As you walk through modern-day San Francisco, you'll sometimes find replicas of his notes in antique shops. Some say they're cursed, others say they bring luck. But the truth? They're reminders that value isn't printed, it's believed. That dignity isn't granted, it's chosen. And that one man in a costume, with no army and no gold, printed currency that still outlives some banks. And we're not done. Next, you'll hear about the fall, the illness, the last decree, and the day the city stopped in mourning. For a man who ruled nothing and touched everything. To be continued in Part 7, The Emperor's Last Walk Through the Fog. Part 7, The Emperor's Last Walk Through the Fog. Somewhere between the street lamp and the stars, he stumbled. You can't explain why the air felt heavier that night. The fog was the same, rolling in like a soft blanket over San Francisco's shoulders. The horses clopped down California Street. The cable cars rang out, and as always, the Emperor walked. But something was different. His pace was slower, his coat less buttoned. His shoulders, just slightly, sank beneath the weight of something you couldn't see. And for the first time in 20 years, Norton didn't wave. January 8, 1880, a Thursday. The Emperor dines that evening at a restaurant near California and DuPont, same as always. He pays not with money, but with dignity. The owner, as always, refuses payment. "It is the honor of the Empire," he says, handing Norton a piece of pie wrapped in wax paper. Norton nods, smiles faintly, walks out into the fog. He crosses the street. A few steps in. A pause. A hand to his chest. Then collapse. You are not there when it happens. But the city is. A crowd gathers. Someone shouts. A boy runs for the police. Within minutes, 2 officers arrive. Not with scorn. Not with haste. But with something approaching reverence. They kneel. Touch his pulse. Nothing. Just his cane lying beside him, his worn boots pointing outward, and his crown, tilted but still on. Joshua Abraham Norton, Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico, is dead. He died with pennies in his pocket, no family, no estate, no known next of kin. But within hours, the news spreads like wildfire. And San Francisco does something it has never done before or since. It stops. The San Francisco Chronicle runs a black-bordered obituary on the front page. Le roi est mort. The king is dead. Joshua Norton, for over 20 years, Emperor of these United States, departed this life on the evening of January 8, 1880. A man whose eccentricity cloaked profound wisdom and quiet dignity. He will be missed, not only as a curiosity, but as a soul who gave color to a gray city. The streets are silent that morning. Boys sell papers with trembling hands. Old merchants hang his imperial notes in their windows, framed in black cloth. Children leave flowers on the steps where he used to speak. And the city, so loud, so hungry, so unforgiving, mourns a man who ruled only by imagination. You're standing now in front of the old hall on Stockton Street. It's packed. Bodies. Inside the coffin is his uniform, pressed and regal, his sword, his feathered hat, and one of his imperial notes, placed on his chest like a final declaration. $10, payable in eternity. But let's return to you. Because this isn't just history, it's legacy. Why did they mourn him? Why did a city built on industry and money pause to grieve a pauper in a fake crown? because he gave them something they didn't know they needed: permission to imagine. He offered dignity where there was none, justice when systems failed, laughter that wasn't cruel, leadership without conquest. He was a walking contradiction. He was a living ideal. He was true. And now, even in death, he challenges you. What is power, really? Is it gold, guns, votes? Or is it the ability to walk through fog and still believe the world can be better, just because you say so? Norton had nothing. No wealth, no office, no children to carry on his name. But today, in 2025, you can still find his memory living in strange corners. A plaque on Market Street where he collapsed. A small section of the Bay Bridge unofficially named in his honor. An annual Emperor Norton Day where people wear costumes and hand out fake currency with real smiles. He left no kingdom behind, and yet somehow, he still rules. One final story. At his funeral, a boy asked his mother, "Was he really the emperor?" She thought for a moment and said, "He believed he was, and maybe that's enough." We're nearing the end now, but before the curtain falls, there are still stories left. The secret of the funeral that almost never happened. The judge who almost had him declared insane, but couldn't bring himself to do it. The modern movements calling for the bridge to finally, officially, bear his name. And finally, what Norton's story teaches us, not just about history, but about ourselves. To be continued in Part 8, The Trial That Never Happened. Was he truly mad? Part 8, The Trial That Never Happened. Was he truly mad? There was a moment, quiet, delicate, where history stood at a fork in the road. One path would have led to shame, to an asylum, to a forgotten man tucked away behind iron bars and pity. The other, to the legend we still whisper about today. This is the story of the trial that never happened, and the impossible verdict that saved an empire of one. Let's set the scene. The year is 1867. The emperor is in his prime. His proclamations are printed in 3 daily newspapers. He walks with measured steps, saluted by policemen, cheered by children. His uniform is still crisp, his beard neatly trimmed. But behind closed doors, the city grows nervous. A newly appointed magistrate, Judge Henry C. Hyde, receives a formal complaint from a citizen. One Joshua Norton, self-titled Emperor, is a public menace and should be committed. The charge? Insanity. The judge asks around. He learns Norton has no income, no official position, walks the city issuing orders no one legally obeys. He's told Norton refers to foreign leaders as brother sovereigns. He signs letters as Emperor and Protector. He's never married, lives alone, talks to lampposts occasionally. And yet, he's also told Norton has never harmed a soul. He pays his debts when he can. He stops street fights. He comforts grieving widows. He's welcomed everywhere. So the judge hesitates. And then he sends a clerk with a message. Summon Norton to court. Word spreads like fire in dry hay. They're going to lock him away. The streets buzz with panic. Merchants who've accepted his currency organize a petition. Writers draft columns. A small crowd gathers outside the courthouse the next morning, holding signs that read, "Don't cage the emperor. Madness with dignity is better than sanity with greed. Let him rule." And inside the marble hall, Norton stands alone. No lawyer, no entourage, just his uniform, his cane, and his eyes, calm as glass. Judge Hyde enters, looks at the man, then looks at the stack of complaints. He begins. Mr. Norton, this court has been asked to evaluate your mental condition. But Norton raises a hand gently. Your Honor, may I address the court not as a defendant, but as an equal? There's a pause. The room stills. And the judge, for reasons unknown, nods. Then Norton speaks, not in jest, not in the royal voice he uses on the streets. He speaks plainly, softly, like someone who's waited a long time to be heard seriously. I have harmed no one. I demand no taxes. I do not coerce or mislead. I merely act the part of what is missing, a leader with conscience. I wear the title, yes, but only to remind the people what dignity can look like, even in madness. If that is insanity, then may the world be filled with more of it.
Silence. Then, something rare. The judge smiles. A tired, genuine, almost fatherly smile. And he says, "You are eccentric, Mr. Norton, but the city seems better with you in it." Then he turns to the clerk. "No commitment will be ordered. Let this court stand adjourned, in honor of His Majesty." The crowd outside erupts. Newspapers run the headline, "The Emperor is innocent. Long may he reign." That night, Norton walks through Chinatown, tipping his feathered cap. A woman weeps. A child hugs his leg. He bows in return. And for a moment, a brief, tender moment, San Francisco feels like a fairy tale that decided to believe in itself. But the story doesn't end there. You might wonder, was he truly sane? The records never say. Doctors never examined him formally. But in his writings, you find no rants, no hate, no threats, only strange wisdom, paradoxes, truths wrapped in theatrical silk. Here's one. To believe you are nothing is as dangerous as believing you are everything. I chose to believe I was something useful. And another. A madman chases a crown for himself. A ruler wears it for others. Would a madman say that? Or a man so deeply sane he had to invent a costume just to survive a mad world? Modern psychologists sometimes study Norton's case in lectures on constructive delusion. They use terms like harmless psychosis, protective identity formation, functional schizophrenia. But you, listening now, you know that science can't always label what the soul understands instinctively. Norton wasn't just a man. He was a mirror. And like all great mirrors, he showed the truth not of himself, but of us. There's something terrifying in that, isn't there? That a man with no power could be more respected than those with titles. That sanity and madness might not be opposites, but neighboring rooms with a thin wall between them. And that sometimes, to stay sane in a senseless world, you have to invent your own reality, then invite others in. Joshua Norton never ruled a nation, but he ruled a city's heart. And in that, he accomplished what most leaders never will. Still, questions remain. Where did his uniform come from? Why did no one ever mug him? Why, in a city famed for brutality and hustle, did even criminals leave him alone? That's where we go next, into the strange respect Norton commanded in the underworld. And how, even in the lawless corners of San Francisco, the Emperor was untouchable.
Part 9. The Emperor and the Thieves Who Wouldn't Steal.
Part 9. The Emperor and the Thieves Who Wouldn't Steal. What kind of power makes a pickpocket stop mid-reach and tip his hat instead? Not fear, not threat, not wealth, but something older, something sacred. Call it myth, call it dignity, call it the kind of authority that doesn't wear a badge, but walks like it invented one. This is the story of how even San Francisco's underworld bent the knee to a man who owned nothing. It's 1875. The city is a jungle of fog, firelight, and fortune. Gangs run the wharves.
Opium flows under the planks of Chinatown. In the Barbary Coast, sailors vanish after dark, their pockets emptied by men who smile as they slit. Law? It flickers like gaslight. But there's one figure who walks the filth and flame untouched. No bodyguards, no pistol, just a cane, a crumpled coat, and a stare that feels older than the city itself. Joshua Norton, Emperor of the United States, Protector of Mexico. Untouchable. A witness once said, you could see him walk through the dens of thieves, and they'd part like church pews. No one laid a hand on him. They'd nod, some even bow. One man tried to mock him once. He was slapped by his own crew. Why? Why would the lowest of the low, men who thought nothing of murder, show reverence to a man who spoke like a Shakespearean ghost? Because even in their dark world, truth smells different. And Norton smelled of something real. Let's tell a true tale. One night in the Barbary Coast, a drunken gambler reaches for Norton's sash, laughing, yelling, "Let's see what gold the Emperor hides." He touches the coat. Before he can blink, a man named Big Tom, knife slinger, face like gravel, grabs the gambler by the throat and slams him into the wall. "Touch him again," Tom growls, "and you'll leave with stumps for fingers." The gambler blinks, bleeds, retreats. Norton? He simply adjusts his crown and says softly, "Let the man go. Even knaves forget themselves now and then." That's the thing about Norton. He never carried a weapon, never spoke in anger, never begged for protection. But he got it everywhere. Some said it was luck, others legend. But there's another answer. He gave criminals what no one else did: respect. He never spoke down, never scolded. He saw them not as rats in the alley, but as citizens of his realm. And somehow, they rose to meet him in that space. There's another story. A brothel in Pacific Street, Madame Leona's. Loud, dangerous, frequented by politicians, sailors, and killers alike. One night, Norton appears, uninvited. The madam stares. The guards tense. There's a secret here. You can't steal from someone who has nothing to lose. But even more than that, you don't mock someone who lives with absolute conviction. Thieves understood this better than priests. They could smell lies. And Norton, he never lied. He might have lived in a fantasy, but he never pretended to be anyone but exactly who he was. Sometimes in the darkest taverns, you'd find his currency pinned to the wall, not as a joke, but like a relic, a ward, a reminder that even in chaos, some truths refuse to die. And in that world of whiskey and whispers, Norton became a kind of saint. Modern scholars dismiss it. They say the stories are exaggerated, that criminals wouldn't respect a pauper. But ask the old city archivists. They'll tell you about the unsigned letters left at his door, gifts from unknown friends. Fresh bread, boots, a new coat, always without a note. And once, in a winter of 1878, when Norton fell ill for 3 days, not one merchant allowed a single dollar to be charged to his name. One man even paid his rent. Who? No one ever confessed. So you ask again, what kind of power does a man have when even criminals choose to protect his myth instead of prey on his body? It wasn't fear. It wasn't fame. It was purity. The emperor lived so close to his ideals that it infected the spaces around him. He reminded even the worst men that there was still a world, however small, where honor meant something. And here's the strangest thing. In a city where everyone wore masks, liars, hustlers, con men, the only man who was truly playing a role was the most honest of them all. You finish this chapter wondering, who do we call insane? The man who walks into the pit and makes thieves bow? Or the world that lets real kings lie and real liars rule? Because Norton never touched a throne, but he commanded more loyalty than most presidents, and the city remembered, even now. There's a bar in North Beach that still serves the Emperor's Shot, free to anyone who toasts without malice. And under the Bay Bridge, there's a plaque that reads, Here once walked a man who ruled no one, and yet ruled us all. But one mystery remains, one final riddle, his funeral. There are rumors it almost didn't happen, that the city forgot to plan it, that it was nearly left to rot in silence, until a final strange miracle turned it all around. To be continued in Part 10, The Funeral the City Nearly Forgot. Part 10. The Funeral the City Nearly Forgot, approximately 1,100 words. In the end, it almost ended in silence. No trumpets, no procession, no final decree. For all his years parading through San Francisco's streets like a royal ghost, Norton, Emperor of the United States, Protector of Mexico, was on the verge of being forgotten within hours of his death. The body lay still in the county morgue, draped only in the threadbare coat he wore when he collapsed. There were no funds, no arrangements, no heirs. The coroner marked the file, no assets, burial in Pauper's Field recommended. And that was it. A king consigned to dust. An empire folded into obscurity. Or so it seemed. But something stirred. A ripple, quiet at first, then undeniable. It began with a letter. Delivered by hand to the offices of the San Francisco Chronicle the morning after his death. No return address, no signature, only 4 words scrawled in clean black ink. He deserves more than this. Attached, a check for $50, enough for a coffin. By noon, more envelopes began arriving, some with money, some with notes. One read, "He gave us dreams, let us give him rest." Another, "You don't bury an emperor like a vagrant." Within 2 days, the Chronicle was overwhelmed. Donations flooded in, flowers, flags, a black sash bearing the embroidered words, "From the thieves of Pacific Street, long live the Emperor." It became clear. The city refused to forget. And so began the funeral that San Francisco almost missed, and then turned into legend. January 10th, 1880. The fog lifts early, as if making room for something sacred. The streets glisten with fresh rain, the sidewalks are swept. By 9 a.m., thousands are already waiting outside the old city hall. Clerks and bartenders, bankers and butchers, Chinese immigrants in their finest silks, African-American porters with polished shoes, sailors, sinners, saints, all come to say goodbye to the man who wore no crown, yet made them all feel seen. The coffin is simple, polished pine, brass handles. A bouquet of violets lies across the lid. At the foot of the coffin, a small handwritten placard, Joshua Abraham Norton, Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico, 1818 to 1880. May his empire live in kindness. The procession begins at noon. Down Market Street, past the bakeries that once fed him, past the banks whose failure. At the burial site, Masonic Cemetery, there's no priest, no eulogy, just a moment of silence. Then a voice, deep, cracking, familiar. It's Officer James Patrick O'Brien, one of the policemen who once escorted Norton home in the rain years ago. He steps forward, removes his cap, and says only this: "In a city of liars and thieves, he was honest. In a time of cruelty, he was kind. In a world of madness, he was our mirror. God bless the Emperor." Then, a trumpet plays. One clear, aching note. Then another. Then silence. And that should have been the end. But of course, with Norton, the end is never the end. Years pass. The cemetery is demolished. Graves are moved. And Norton's remains? They vanish. It takes decades to find him again. Volunteers scour old maps, faded ledgers. Finally, in the 1930s, they locate the site. A new marker is laid in Colma, California. It reads simply, Norton I, Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico, resurrected in memory by the people he inspired. And now, you sit in 2025. You scroll through history. You see headlines filled with cynicism, leaders with no soul, people with no trust. And suddenly, the ghost of Norton whispers, what if you could believe again? Not in titles, not in power, but in the idea that imagination, dignity, and kindness are enough to build an empire of their own. Let's ask the question we began with. Was he mad? Yes? No? Who cares? The real question is, was he needed? And to that, San Francisco still answers, with murals, with plaques, with legends passed from cabbie to cabbie. There once was an emperor who ruled nothing, but left behind a kingdom that never stopped growing. This series ends here, but the empire of Norton doesn't. You carry it now, in your thoughts, your questions, your quiet rebellion against the ordinary. Because the true empire was never built of stone. It was built in the hearts of those who dared to believe a man in rags could still wear a crown. Final reflections. Ask yourself, do you know anyone in Vietnamese history who was more eccentric? In your opinion, is eccentricity madness or misunderstood genius? Whose story do you want to hear next?